consequences of a deadly conflict. The international community can no longer ignore the dimensions of the drama ongoing in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. These men, women and children whose tears have bathed the soul of our country deserve more than a simple mention in international debates. They deserve peace and justice. We're faced with brutal aggression in the east of our country, orchestrated by Rwanda under the cover of the terrorist group M23. This isn't just a simple internal conflict or a simple historical difference of views. It's a violent and flagrant violation of our sovereignty and a deliberate attempt to create instability motivated by economic and expansionist ambitions. We have tried everything we can to go down the road of diplomacy. We have extended the hand of friendship. We have taken part in negotiations in good faith, particularly in the framework of the Luanda process. We have addressed the situation in the United Nations, talked about the United Nations situation, documented the crimes and demonstrated complicity. Nonetheless, despite our sincere intention to maintain peace, violence continues. Our people continue to die. Children are growing up under the hail of bombs, deprived of their future. We are no longer simply expecting decisive actions in response to our demands. The status quo is not a choice. Doing nothing is to make a chase. If we leave things to develop, then that will have repercussions well beyond the borders of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. If we let a country's borders be violated in Africa by force, who will be next? Which will be the next piece of disputed territory? Which nation, in its turn, will suffer from the consequences of the precedent? We have to act. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is a sovereign state, and like every sovereign state, it has the right and the duty to defend its territorial integrity and to defend its people. Faced with the aggression imposed upon us, we will use all the means that we have at our disposal to restore peace and to guarantee the security of our nation. And I'll say it again here, we will no longer accept our country being a battlefield for the predatory ambitions of some of our neighbors. We will no longer tolerate the pillage of our strategic riches in the interests of foreign powers. Ladies and gentlemen, apart from the security tragedy and the human tragedy, there's an economic dimension to this conflict, a very important one. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is at the heart of the world energy transition. We have strategic minerals, copper, cobalt, lithium, which are essential for future technologies. However, instead of investing in lasting beneficial partnership, some prefer to base their efforts on predatory pillaging, taking advantage of terrorism, making our people poorer, and slowing down the emergence of an industry which will be responsible and profitable for everyone. Every young person who leaves Africa takes away part of our future and leaves a scar on the continent, adding to our collective failure. It's our urgent obligation to face up to our moral responsibility to build a future for our young people so they can live in a world of growth and stability and prosperity. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, we have opted for development and multilateralism, but this choice will only be made a reality without partner countries, without sincere international cooperation. It's up to you today as well to make a choice. Will you be involved in a future of shared peace and prosperity? Will you be actors in that future, or will you be passive spectators to a repeating tragedy? We're living in a world that is more and more interconnected, and there are no more forgotten conflicts. The instability that is ravaging the Democratic Republic of the Congo today will not just affect Africa, but will affect the whole world in the future. Do not be complicit in the silence. Be the makers of change. We can no longer allow ourselves to wait. History is watching us. All I can say apart from that is that I can assure you that more than ever the people of Congo are determined to defend and maintain the integrity of their country, their territory, whatever the price may be. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I guess you've outlined a number of important points there, but what, in your view, is needed to stop the fighting? Qu'est-ce qui est nécessaire pour mettre fin la guerre?
Mais c'est simple. Ce qui est
nécessaire, c'est
de mettre à l'index le véritable responsable.
Is to point the finger at the party responsible for this situation, which is well known, is Rwanda.
Comme nous tous à l'époque, en 1994, lorsque le Rwanda a été victime.
International community learned pity in 1988, as we all did, when Rwanda was affected by the genocide. And the Democratic Republic of the Congo, at the time Zaire, opened its borders to allow refugees to come in fleeing the genocide. And they arrived, hundreds of thousands of people arrived in Zaire, and unfortunately among those were the people responsible for the genocide as well. Later, Rwanda obtained the right to pursue the people responsible for the genocide on Congolese soil, which is incredible. The international community completely gave up its responsibility there, allowing a country to settle its accounts that way. And there were massacres of entire villages and entire settlements, including Congolese people.
And
that was because of the guilt that the international community felt with respect to the genocide in Rwanda. But Congo was, the Democratic Republic of the Congo was not responsible for this genocide. But the ills of Rwanda, as a result of that, were invited into the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and since then, for 30 years, they've been installed in the east of Congo. And so Rwanda was allowed to do that, and they discovered it was possible to destabilize the regime. They destabilized the regime of Marshal Mobutu, installing Kabila, President Kabila, in the hope that with him they could quietly exploit the natural resources of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But then Unaweza Kabila was killed. Another regime was put into place, which was much more malleable, much more understanding. That was Joseph Kabila. And that regime allowed many things to happen. So Rwanda became more confident and developed its economy, strengthened its economy with stolen products, our natural resources. And with the eye of the international community looking upon that with favor, they then sold these products to big multinational companies and to states. They bought all of this, and that strengthened the position of the Rwandans. And now we're seeing the results of that. And the international community now has to accept its responsibility and deal with this situation at the same time as we do. You evoked a scenario in which the war extends, when there's a regional war, if I understood you correctly. How would you explain that? Well, it's quite simple, really. Rwanda has expansionist ambitions. For some years now, if you listen to what the Rwanda regime is saying, they're saying that a part of the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Masisi-Mbushulu, did in the past belong to Rwanda, to the kingdom of Rwanda. That's actually not true. And that indicates quite clearly their intentions. In Masisi, there's a mine in a place called Rubaya, and there is coltan and the 3 T's, they're called, tungsten, tin and tantalum, and these are materials that are involved in all sorts of products, the new technologies. So these are very valuable metals, and they are feeding this conflict and leading to the shedding of blood. To pillage those resources, the Rwandans have to create permanent instability, so the state has no authority in that region. They promote a kind of ethnic cleansing by provoking massacres, spreading terror, and pushing people out, thus leaving the land free so that they can happily exploit it.
Of how natural resources should be accessed, managed, and the revenues. What would you prefer to see? C'est quoi l'alternative?
What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is investment. We have to have contracts, transparent contracts, with companies working in the industry. That's what we're saying on a daily basis, really. And we've, for example, have taken Apple to court because they're one of the beneficiaries of this illicit trafficking. And after we did that, they're not going to be using materials from Rwanda or the Congo anymore. And we didn't do that just to punish Apple, but to draw its attention and to move it towards the competent authorities who are actually able legally to properly enter into this kind of contract. That's what you have to do. You have to set up companies, or bring companies in who will invest and exploit these resources, extracting them, and in the best case, processing them on the spot to create riches, create prosperity in our country, and to create jobs. And that's why we're going to want to bring peace to that region. All of these young people who are looking for work, who would want to move into jobs there, are no longer being attracted by mining activity or by work in armed groups. So we want to offer them options for peace and stability in the region.
The community had a choice of being spectators or to engage in a responsible manner. And there's a meeting in Addis Ababa, I think today or tomorrow, and then you also have some demain. And then here in Munich, we have some very distinguished leaders from the United States and from the European Union. What is your message to the African Union, and what is your message to other international partners in terms of taking action?
Oui. Le premier message, puisque vous parlez de l'Union.
Well, there's a problem. You were talking about the European Union. I mean, there is a question of putting an end to this unacceptable and scandalous process of buying critical minerals from Rwanda, buying these precious raw materials from Rwanda, because Rwanda does not have any of these materials in its bedrock. They're not there, so that's the first thing. Secondly, today we're seeing a humanitarian drama before our eyes, and after the fall of Goma, there were millions of people around Goma in camps, and they were forced then to go back to where they had come from without any means of transport, without any guarantee that they would find anything when they went home. Their fields had been destroyed, their schools and so on had all been destroyed. There were children who had to go back home with all of the lack of safety and all the insecurity that involved, because it's a war zone. So the humanitarian drama that we saw building up over the past few months around Goma, it's getting worse. So something has to be done about that. Even, I mean, something has to be done very soon. Immediately, because the invaders told all of those people to leave without helping them to leave, and they don't know what to do. There's nothing for them to go back to. There's nothing for them to live off. In the camps, at least, there was humanitarian aid, so that they could eat, so that they could stay alive one way or another, even if the conditions were awful. But there's nothing for them. We're talking about having people walk for days on end without any hope of finding anything to eat at the end of that walk. And in Addis Abeba?
Addis Abeba, il y a une réunion sur...
In Addis Abeba, there's going to be a meeting for the peace and security mentioned this evening. We're going to see what will happen. The Prime Minister and the head of the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo is there to speak for our country. I came here to address European and American decision makers so that more pressure is exerted and so that sanctions can be imposed on Rwanda. Because if you look at our situation and compare it with that of Ukraine and Russia, you'd think you're in two completely different worlds. While it's practically the same situation, you get the impression that the world is ignoring what's happening. Yes, it's worse with us because this conflict has been ongoing for 30 years now, whereas in Russia, Ukraine, it was 2022 that the war really blew up, although things had been happening since 2014. But if you see the way that Russia has been called to account and the way that our conflict has been completely ignored, then you do have to ask the question whether we're not seeing a double standard being implied here. That's what I was saying in the panel I was in before here. There's a serious problem of the functioning of the multilateral system. If you'll allow me, Mr. President, I'm now going to invite questions from the floor. If anyone has any questions, does anyone have questions that they would like to ask of the President?
Non? Si. Alors, là au quatrième rang.
There on the fourth row.
Bonjour encore, Monsieur le Président. Moi, je m'appelle Nimnevo, journaliste à Deutsche Welle. La question que je voulais poser, c'est sur
the question I have is as follows.
Le M23.
I have a question on M23.
Il n'y a pas de discours entre vous et la M23. Est-ce que ça c'est une bonne stratégie pour la réconciliation ou pour trouver une solution sur la situation à RDC? Ça c'est ma première question. Et la deuxième question c'est, vous avez parlé de la nécessité des investissements en RDC.
To have more investment in the DRC. But China and other countries invested in the DRC, and it didn't change anything. Or it didn't change much when it comes to education, to infrastructure. It didn't really improve the living conditions of people. So my question is, what do you want more, and what can really change the situation of this country right now? Thank you.
Déjà, par rapport à la première question,
first,
vous devez
pick up
savoir
on
que
your
ce n'est
first
pas
question.
une
You
question
should know
d'ego,
that
une
it's not really
question
about
d'orgueil
ego.
ou d'arrogance.
It's not about arrogance either.
De parler
When we say that we
directement
do not want to talk to the M23,
D'abord, la première raison, c'est
the
parce
first
que
reason
le
is
M23
that
a massacré
M23 massacred
et
people.
a bombardé des camps
It bombed camps.
de déplacés où il y avait des
It
femmes et
affected
des enfants.
displaced people.
Ils ont été massacrés.
Women and children were massacred, and therefore, for us, this is a terrorist group, and we do not want to negotiate or
La
talk
deuxième
with
raison,
terrorists.
c'est parce que
The second
il y a
reason
le processus de
is that
Nairobi
we have
processus
the
de
Nairobi
Nairobi
process
règle la question des groupes armés.
to settle the issue of armed groups.
Et donc, le M23 étant un groupe armé, il est logé à la même enseigne
is
que
an armed
tous
group.
les autres groupes
Therefore,
armés
it is to be
évoluant en
considered
République démocratique
similarly
du Congo.
to other armed
Et
groups
il doit
in the
avoir le même
DRC,
traitement, donc il doit rentrer
and
dans
therefore,
La troisième
there's
raison, c'est parce que
equal treatment.
le M23
The third reason
est un mouvement
is that
qui
M23
est vide de contenu. C'est en fait
a movement
un supplétif
that has
du Rwanda.
nothing.
Le M23
It's a vacuum.
est
Actually,
auparavant que le Rwanda, mais
it
en
is
réalité,
acting
derrière, c'est l'armée
as Rwanda,
donc le
as a
Rwanda
proxy,
se bat.
because
La preuve
behind
de ce que je
M23
c'est
there
que
is
dans le
Rwanda,
processus de
and
Luanda,
therefore,
de Luanda en Angola,
you know, in
nous
the
avons
Luanda
discuté avec
process,
le Rwanda.
we talked
Si
with
le Rwanda
Rwanda.
n'avait rien à voir dans ce conflit, pourquoi est-ce
If
que
Rwanda
vous
had nothing to
répondez aux
do with the
invitations du
conflict,
facilitateur pour
how can you
discuter avec
explain
la
that
République démocratique?
they discussed
Donc, vous comprenez
with
que
the DRC
Rwanda
as part
se
of these
cache
talks?
derrière
So
et qui envoie
you
un
understand
mouvement
that Rwanda is hiding behind the M23
à la table des négociations pour
And
parler
they
des intérêts du Rwanda.
are trying to
Alors,
defend
autant,
their own
nous
vested
disons,
interests.
autant discuter avec le parrain lui-même.
So we do not want to talk
quoi ses
to
intérêts,
the
au lieu de
M23.
faire
We want to
notre-
directly
notre
negotiate
dignité
with
à discuter
Rwanda,
avec
because otherwise
auparavant.
we would be losing time.
Donc voilà la raison pour laquelle nous le disons. Et quand vous dites que ça ne va pas faire
And when you
avancer,
say
mais si ça va faire avancer la paix, parce
that
que comme je vous l'ai dit,
it won't foster
le
peace,
processus de Nairobi
I
est
disagree.
là.
As you said,
Et
we
le
have the
processus de
Nairobi
Nairobi
process,
était justement
and the aim of this process was
régler la
to do just that,
problématique des groupes armés.
and to
Alors,
tackle the issue of armed
par
groups.
rapport aux investisseurs, vous avez parlé
And
des
now,
Chinois et
regarding investors, you
Vous
talked
avez
about
raison.
China and other players,
ça n'a
and
pas-
you're right.
ces
It is true
investissements
that
ou
these investments,
ces exploitations des mines, des minerais
these
congolais avec
licenses
des
to
contrats
extract
chinois ou
the
autres
DRC
n'ont pas
mineral
donné
resources,
grand-chose.
it didn't
Vous avez
really lead to anything
Lorsque je deviens
concretely.
président, justement,
But you're
en
right.
2019,
When I
bon, on
when
a
I
eu, malheureusement l'année du Covid qui a
became
paralysé
president
le
in
commerce
2019, it is true that we had
international pendant
the
2 ans,
COVID-19 pandemics,
Mais en 2021,
so
je reprends-
nothing happened
je
in
prends langue avec
2020,
les Chinois
2021. But in
pour leur dire
2021,
que je n'étais
I
pas
started
d'accord avec
talking
la
to
manière
China to
dont
say that
notre partenariat était
I didn't agree with the way
entrepris.
things were going.
Et donc, pour moi, il était
in this
question
partnership.
de revoir les termes
So
de tous ces contrats
I
qui avaient
wanted to
été
review
signés
the terms of
avant
all the
l'avènement.
contracts that were signed
Et,
beforehand,
d'aller sur des modèles qui seraient gagnants.
and I wanted to have a win-win
avec la
situation,
possibilité, donc, pour nous, Congolais,
to have a
comme je l'ai
situation
dit
where
tout à l'heure,
us Congolese,
dans
as I said earlier
précédente
in my
intervention, là, d'aller
address
sur des
before,
modèles gagnants-gagnants, qui
the
fait
aim
que nous allons
was to
développer
have a win-win
ces
situation.
produits. Donc, en plus de les avoir produits, nous les
We want
transformons
to-
dans notre propre
We
pays.
want to have
nous ajoutons
production
une
and also
valeur à ces
process in our country
donc de la
so that we
richesse,
can have added value
créer de l'emploi.
and so that we can create jobs. The only challenge we have right now is the energy challenge, because as you may imagine, we need a lot of energy to extract these natural resources and to process them as well.
Qui va nous amener à ces étapes-là.
So ultimately, we are trying to have a process where we can create a whole supply chain within our country, and you will see that this will have a more positive impact on the economy and socially. This process is underway. Unfortunately,
de ces guerres stupides et injustes qu'on nous impose,
it's a bit slow
parce que nous serons obligés maintenant de
mobiliser
les ressources que nous avions peut-être.
This is quite unfair because now we need to mobilize the resources that we would have rather allocated to have infrastructure, and instead we need to use these resources to strengthen our armed forces and to counter this attack. So unfortunately, this is again a loss of time. But that's probably what our enemy is trying to do. They want to destabilize us while they are looting our resources and sell them afterwards.
Y a-t-il des autres questions?
Do we have other questions?
One question, Monsieur le Président, I wanted to ask you is what is your expectation of the Luanda process now? Qu'est-ce que vous souhaitez? Qu'est-ce que vous... c'est quoi l'avenir de...
Oui. Maintenant, le processus de Luanda, je crois qu'il connaît quelques turbulences parce que je crois que vous avez suivi
a lot of turmoil when it comes to the Luanda process. You probably heard the address of President Lorenzo, who will become the African Union president. So he will have a bigger agenda very soon, and therefore he won't be able to do much in this regard. But this question had already been raised during the joint summit between the East Africa Community and the South African Development Community. This question was raised because we tackled this issue during this summit, the fact that President Lorenzo would have more responsibilities, and therefore maybe the possibility to involve other heads of state.
Donc ce ne sera plus lui adjoindre des chefs d'État, mais ce sera désigner des chefs d'État qui vont reprendre
heads of state will be designated to take over. So this process is not dead.
En attendant, j'espère la désignation du président João Lourenço et d'un nouveau facilitateur.
We will very soon have a new facilitator.
Je peux continuer à poser des questions, mais y a-t-il are there any questions?
I can ask some other questions, but are there any questions from the floor?
Hi, Mr. President. Thank you. I'm interested in the case that you had with Apple, and I'm wondering if there is future possibilities for public-private sector solutions to the critical minerals problem, and wondering if perhaps the Kimberley process example with conflict diamonds would be a possibility.
Oui, moi je pense que vous avez raison.
Well, yes, I think you're right, and I've said this before, in fact. For other kinds of mining, coltan, gold,
cassitérite, en fait, tout le monde peut en citer.
All of the different things you could mention. Maybe we need a Kimberley process for all of these minerals as well.
Je crois que ce serait une bonne chose.
I think that would be a good thing, which would make it possible for us to intervene on that market. We need an identification with geomarkers, a kind of genotype of the minerals, because there is a technology these days to identify the origin of a mineral and exactly where it came from, which place it was mined in, so that you can then trace it. And there are companies that can do that. And I think that would be a solution. As far as Apple is concerned, I wanted to say what I said before. The idea wasn't to target Apple. But it was very symbolic, because Apple is a source of mobile telephones, and their phones were made with coltan, blood coltan, from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And we were saying, look, we want to stop the massacres. And the people that you're involved with, the people you're buying your minerals from, are buying it from Rwanda, who bought it, who stole it from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so you're encouraging massacres. And if you want to continue this trade, then come in through the front door. The authorities of the Democratic Republic of the Congo exist. They're there. They're legitimate. And all they're asking is that we have this kind of partnership where you come in and we work together in a win-win partnership, which will then make it possible for you to evolve and to develop and do business, and it will also make it possible for our republic to develop.
C'est comme ça que nous voyons la chose.
So that's how we see things.
Ça ne se passe pas de cette manière-là.
Although, unfortunately, that's not the way things happen.
Other questions from the floor? Monsieur le Président, one question I wanted to ask you was about opposition. You mentioned that you've been president for 6 years and there are elections in the DRC. What about opposition within the DRC? Is that a factor in terms of bringing this conflict to an end or complicating it further?
D'abord, la situation de l'opposition.
Well, firstly, the situation of the opposition.
J'allais dire, elle est. Nous trouvons aujourd'hui en République.
I'd say that at the moment,
deux sortes d'opposition.
In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, we have two kinds of opposition. There's the well-known opposition, the official opposition,
Ça donne à ses activités,
which engages in its normal activities in a normal way, which took part in the last elections
avec le président
on an equal playing field with the outgoing president,
qui a perdu ses élections.
And which lost the elections clearly.
Et cela a été reconnu par tous.
And that was recognized by all of the serious observers.
Il y a une autre opposition.
And there's another opposition.
Du pouvoir de mon prédécesseur.
From the background of my predecessor,
De participer au processus électoral, a refusé.
Which refused to be involved in the electoral process because it was preparing for destabilization,
Pour empêcher la
which was intended to start biting after 2003 to stop the next elections happening. But since that was not successful, and elections can take place, they've now found another way of doing things, and Rwanda and the M23 and the AFC are there to make war on us and to destabilize the country. So there's these two different kinds of opposition in our country. And when you ask,
Comment vous avez dit ça?
how did you put this?
D'influence.
If they have some kind of influence on things, well, yes, they do, because they have the capacity to cause damage, as we've seen with the developments coming out of Rwanda. But what I want to do is to face everyone with their responsibility. History will judge what we do. Those who are victims today of the excesses of the opposition, I was called them, they are the Congolese people, and one day we'll know who did what.
la démocratie dans
And I will say here today, democracy in our country has never worked as well as under my
nous étions dans
presidency.
Les opposants étaient assassinés.
In the past,
On entrait le pouvoir
people in opposition were killed, and when the opposition again got into power, you saw this. You had people, you had the police ordered to go into churches and kill people. If there were demonstrations, what you had to do afterwards was count the dead people, and that doesn't happen anymore. Demonstrations take place, everything's safe, rights and freedoms are respected. And if there are excesses, they are punished.
Et anarchie.
Of course, you can't
qui font de l'anarchie, ils sont convoqués
confuse anarchy with opposition. Opposition is not the same thing as anarchy. Those responsible for anarchy are taken to court and punished.
L'opposition qui a pris les armes.
And I do have the impression that the part of the opposition that has taken up arms and has, along with Rwanda, worked on this blow against the Republic is characterized by the fact that the real commanders are hiding. And the real head of this opposition is my predecessor, Kabila, but he doesn't accept that responsibility and face up to it.
More question? Because otherwise I would, Mr. President, you know, to end where we started, the human tragedy in your country, the number of people being killed, the number of women in particular who have been victims of sexual violence, the number of displaced, and yet we're living in a moment where availability of humanitarian support is going down, and where there are huge demands on rich countries, you know, for other crises. Have you, in your conversations here in Munich, been talking to Americans, Europeans? I see many leading figures from the Middle East about the need to attract more support in this area and more action.
Bon, oui, j'ai parlé à des Américains.
Well, yes, I've talked to the Americans, to the Europeans, and soon I'll be talking to the people from the Middle East as well.
Diplomatie et politique que humanitaire.
About humanitarian issues, I don't think they have the answers to my humanitarian needs. But you didn't have a response because they don't have the resources, or because they're not up to date? No, not because they're... No, those who I've seen are not involved in humanitarian affairs. It's not their job. But I'll ask them to pass on the message so that it is heard by those who do have the resources to address the humanitarian drama that our people are going through at the moment.
Je n'ai pas parlé de ça directement.
So I haven't directly addressed that with the people here because
la capacité, quoi.
They don't have the means to do anything on that. So all that remains for me to do now is to thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you for being here with us. I don't know if you have a message to wind up with. Well, message, finishing statement, last word. I'd say once again that the Democratic Republic of the Congo is going through a truly dramatic situation. And what you are seeing today is something that people have been living through for 30 years. It's now appeared as if it were a new conflict, but in truth, it's a conflict that has been latent for 30 years now. These people have always been in distress, they've been displaced, women have been raped.
leurs productions sont volées aussi.
What they have produced has been stolen from their fields. So everything has been done to destabilize this region, and it's been deprived of everything that should make it rich, and that to the profit of big companies who then process those riches into things that you can see all around you. Mobile phones, your tea, your coffee, your cocoa. There's all sorts of products that arrive here in the West that are blood-stained, stained with the blood of the Congolese, innocent people who are dying simply because they live in a part of the earth which is brimming over with riches under the soil. So there's a flagrant injustice, and it demands that those who are remaining silent react differently. Remaining silent is a way of risking complicity in the barbarism that we're seeing in the Democratic Republic of the Congo as well. So I call on everyone and every one of you here, whatever opportunities you have or whatever power you have, to pass on a message or to make a decision at whatever level you can do that at, that would be a contribution which would mean something, which could perhaps help bring a solution to the dramatic situation of our people in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Thank you very much, Mr. President.